I never thought that I'd have to wake up one day and wonder if my entire website was going to be unplugged because of an opinion that I expressed.
Social media has been censoring everyone, not just conservatives, for a long time now. It ramped up after Trump and Brexit because the neo-lib establishment wasn't used to losing elections. Everyone, from the alt-right to the communists, neo-Nazis, radical leftists, even libertarians, centrists, classical liberals, anyone who wasn't entirely safe and sanitized and family-friendly eventually, for one reason or another, saw the long arm of censorship come for them. The behaviors of Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and other big tech companies on this matter goes entirely against the spirit, if not the letter, of current legislation. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act basically made the modern internet. It allowed platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to not be held legally liable for the content their users post if they make good faith attempts to moderate that content in an unbiased manner. And I hate to break it to all the idealists listening in here, but free speech was not the only reason this law was put into place. American supremacy in the tech cultural sphere would absolutely fall behind the rest of the world if all of the fledgling startups were squashed by thousands of lawsuits due to edgy shitposts made on their services. And it was these safe harbor protections that made the early internet so great. Yes, it was the Wild West. Yes, people flung shit all the time. But there was rapid growth, there was expansion, there were new ideas being passed around. People were figuring things out for themselves, largely unshackled by any kind of larger authority. It was the wet dream of anybody who values digital freedom. But slowly, as time went on, the people who ran these companies, like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and others, they went from being free speech entrepreneur libertarian types in their mid-20s to grouchy woke-scold millennials in their mid-30s. And slowly over time, this began to reflect in the way those platforms were moderated. Safety became more important to them than freedom, so bit by bit, free speech was chipped away from all sides, left, right, doesn't matter. And when you finally arrive here, in 2020, they are routinely banning speech that is explicitly allowed under the First Amendment. And when they began doing that, they became editors of content, not neutral platforms. And Trump's finally had enough.
The choices that Twitter makes when it chooses to suppress, edit, blacklist, shadow, ban, are editorial decisions, pure and simple. They're editorial decisions. In those moments, Twitter ceases to be a neutral public platform and they become an editor with a viewpoint. And I think we can say that about others also, whether you're looking at Google, whether you're looking at Facebook, and perhaps others.
He wants to bring the government hammer down on them for this, and I don't blame him. You would find it entirely unacceptable if, say, your phone provider read your texts or listened to your calls, decided that you had said something that wasn't illegal but a bit too edgy for their CEO's liking, and cut your phone service off. That is exactly what social media is doing right now. So, Trump decided to put out an executive order on this topic. An executive order isn't legislation. He can't change existing law using an executive order. He can push Republicans in the House to start putting forward legislation, but he can't unilaterally just change the law himself. An executive order is more like a declaration from the current administration on how they plan to interpret existing law and how they plan to enforce it. For example, Obama did a very similar thing with the Dreamers. That was entirely executive order, and it basically amounted to him announcing that enforcing certain parts of current immigration law would simply not be a high priority for his administration, even though those exact laws weren't technically off the books at the time. So the executive order is titled Preventing Online Censorship, and if you want to read the full thing, it's very easy to find online. But here's the juicy bits. The emergence and growth of online platforms in recent years raises important questions about applying the ideals of the First Amendment to modern communications technology. Today, many Americans follow the news, stay in touch with friends and family, and share their views on current events through social media and other online platforms. As a result, these platforms function in many ways as a 21st century equivalent of the public square. We cannot allow a limited number of online platforms to handpick the speech that Americans may access and convey online. This practice is fundamentally un-American and anti-democratic. When large, powerful social media companies censor opinions with which they disagree, they exercise dangerous power. Social media platforms are invoking inconsistent, irrational, and groundless justifications to censor or otherwise punish American speech here at home, Meanwhile, several online platforms are profiting from and promoting the aggression and disinformation spread by foreign governments like China. My commitment to free and open debate on the internet remains as strong as ever. Therefore, it remains the policy of the United States that lawful content should be free from censorship in our digital marketplace of ideas. As a nation, we must foster and protect diverse viewpoints in today's digital communications environment where all Americans can and should have a voice. We must seek transparency and accountability from online platforms and encourage standards and tools to protect and preserve the integrity and openness of American discourse and freedom of expression. And here's where we talk about Section 230. It is the policy of the United States to foster clear, non-discriminatory ground rules promoting free and open debate on the internet. Prominent among these rules is the immunity from liability created by Section 230C of the Communications Decency Act. It is the policy of the United States that the scope of that immunity should be clarified. When an interactive computer service provider removes or restricts access to content and its actions do not meet the criteria of subparagraph C2A of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, it is engaged in editorial conduct. By making itself an editor of content outside the protections of subparagraph C2A, such a provider forfeits any protection from being deemed a publisher or speaker under subsection 230C1, which properly applies only to a provider that merely provides a platform for content supplied by others. It is the policy of the United States that all departments and agencies should apply Section 230C according to the interpretation set out in this section. To further advance the policy described in subsection A of this section, within 30 days of the date of this order, the Secretary of Commerce, through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, shall file a petition for rulemaking with the Federal Communications Commission, requesting that the FCC expeditiously propose regulations to clarify the conditions under which an action restricting access to or availability of material is not taken in good faith, particularly the conditions under which such actions will be considered to be either deceptive, pretextual, or inconsistent with the provider's terms of service, or the result of inadequate notice, the product of unreasoned explanation, or having been undertaken without a meaningful opportunity to be heard. And any other proposed regulations that the NTIA concludes may be appropriate to advance the policy described in subsection A of this section. Long story short, Trump is going after their safe harbor exemptions. Now, strangely enough, Twitter and Facebook are actually at cross purposes regarding this whole thing. Facebook and Twitter clash over fact-checking as Trump threats intensify. For years, Twitter and Facebook have enjoyed a healthy rivalry. They've competed for acquisitions, talent, and advertising dollars, and sometimes gone so far as to copy each other's features in the never-ending pursuit to grow their audiences. But the clash between the two tech companies appeared to take on new life this week, after Twitter's decision to place fact-check labels on some of President Donald Trump's tweets sparked a series of threats, including an imminent executive order regulating social media companies. The CEOs of the two companies traded criticisms in public. Former employees posted their own jabs on social media, and some legislators were quick to highlight the differences between the approach Twitter and Facebook took, potentially only adding to the tensions. We have a different policy than, I think, Twitter on this, Facebook co-founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg told Fox News. I just believe strongly that Facebook shouldn't be the arbiter of truth of everything that people say online. Hours later, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey appeared to push back at the assertion, saying that labeling the tweets with fact checks does not make the social media company an arbiter of truth. Our intention is to connect the dots of conflicting statements and show the information in dispute so people can judge for themselves. The problem with Jack's explanation is that he's not doing it universally to everyone. He doesn't even have the manpower to do that. It's very clearly politically motivated who Twitter is targeting. Yes, adding a header saying that this tweet might be fake news under a tweet that might actually be fake news is the truth. But if you only do it to a select number of accounts, and leave alone all the many millions of other accounts that are also peddling fake news, then you have a serious problem, and it's not the fact that you're lying, it's the fact that you're only selectively telling the truth. It's very easy to cherry-pick which stories you want to cover, which messages you want to label, where and when rules are going to be enforced, such that you're not actually lying to anybody, but you're still acting like a scumbag. And don't think that I'm siding with everybody's favorite synth, Zuckerberg, on this either. While it's admirable that he still believes that Facebook shouldn't be the arbiter of truth of everything people say online, Facebook still routinely bans literally everyone for nearly anything. But of course, because Zuckerberg, if only in speech and not in action, doesn't want Facebook to be censoring everyone, the hashtag delete Facebook began briefly trending. Look at all of these brainlets. They are actually complaining that Facebook will not shut down speech they disapprove of. It's incredible. Stop looking to authority figures, whether they're corporate or government or whatever, to regulate your life for you. It is your responsibility as an adult to take in all sources of information and try to synthesize the truth. Yes, that does mean you can't go through life on autopilot. Welcome to not being an NPC. I mean, it's funny reading some of these, dude. People are like posting Mark Zuckerberg killed Epstein, Mark Zuckerberg killed himself. You know, obvious shitposts and being like, this is why Facebook needs to fact check every single thing. No, it's not. That's just like stupid. It's funny. The best parts of the internet are still primarily places to fuck around and talk shit. If you want to make a shitpost that says Mark Zuckerberg drinks bleach to try and cure the coronavirus or something, I think you should be able to go ahead. It's stupid fun, man. Have you guys forgotten what fun is? Oh, also, if you Gen Z brainlets are actually serious about this, you know that means you're gonna have to stop using Instagram, right? Since Facebook owns Instagram? Though I have a feeling that's probably not gonna happen. Y'all are way too addicted to your influencers or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what's going on over there. I'm an old man at this point. Take your executive order and shove it, Trump. We're gonna keep telling the truth about you. On Twitter and everywhere else. Get used to it. Yeah, that's okay, man. Like, seriously, I don't think this is aimed at you. In fact, this is allowing you to do this. Like, imagine if there was a big shakeup over in the offices of all of the various big tech firms, all the social media companies, and a whole bunch of people on the extreme right suddenly found themselves running those companies somehow. Enforcing political neutrality on these companies would allow people like you to continue to use those platforms to criticize Trump and other Republicans, and that's exactly how it should be. I think he's doing this to ensure that everyone has free speech, both you and people who disagree with you. And you know, maybe that's your problem with it. Another trending hashtag that came about maybe a day or two later was hashtag Donald is over party, and it is very similar to the previous one, in that it's just basically a whole bunch of people who are celebrating the fact that when Trump tweeted about the current Minneapolis riots, which I'm sure I will have to do a video on at a later date, but when Trump tweeted about them, Twitter hid one of his tweets, said that it glorified violence, but still allowed you to read it because, hey, he's the president. But I guess there's a whole bunch of people that consider this to be like a giant own or something. So they're just going wild like, LOL, Twitter put a thing on Trump's tweet. Look at the loser. Dude, he's still the president. Like, do you think the internet points actually mean anything, man? Do you think that Twitter's authority supersedes the authority of the President of the United States? And here's the tweet that caused the stir. I can't stand back and watch this happen to a great American city, Minneapolis. A total lack of leadership. Either the very weak radical left mayor, Jacob Frey, get his act together and bring the city under control, or I will send in the National Guard and get the job done right. Then the second tweet was blocked and had this message put over top of it. This tweet violated the Twitter rules about glorifying violence. However, Twitter has determined that it may be in the public's interest for the tweet to remain accessible. The blocked tweet says, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you." Now, to me, this doesn't seem like glorifying violence. To me, this just seems like Trump warning the mayor of Minneapolis to stop hamstringing his own police force and have them step in and take control. Because, and like I said earlier, I will get into this in a different video, currently, what's going on in Minneapolis has nothing to do with the absolute injustice that is the murder of George Floyd by a police officer, and has everything to do with thugs, yes, thugs, rioting and looting. But Twitter thinks this tweet is unacceptable. While it's behind this message, it can't be liked or retweeted. It can still be viewed, and it's not deleted, presumably because, as per the Supreme Court's orders, the president's Twitter account is a matter of public record. But I bet if this were anybody else, at least anybody else with this political persuasion, this would be deleted. We know this because Olivia Gatwood's take of burn it down, fuck property, fuck cops is only currently offline, not because Twitter deleted it, but because she deleted it, after everyone came down on her for such a terrible, awful take. When people on the radical left advocate for violence in the name of their politics, it's punching up. It's attacking people who have systemic power and privilege. and so it's not glorifying violence. But when President Trump says, hey, maybe restore law and order in your burning city, or else the feds will have to come in and handle it, apparently that's glorifying violence. There is obviously a political bias at play here. The best part about this whole thing is that Jack Dorsey himself seems to want to go to war against Trump over this. Twitter comms started a thread where they talked about the public interest notice they placed on Donald Trump's Twitter account and why they did it. And then Jack retweeted that from his personal account. Geez, it seems like he's openly picking a fight with Trump at this point. I hope he's secure in his position. But let's be honest here, guys. The president isn't innocent himself. Here is one of many morons who wants things to go even further in the other direction, away from free speech. Dear Jack Dorsey, delete these ugly tweets, they're vicious lies. You must cleanse Twitter of this Trump stain, if not of Trump himself. Sincerely, Triblaw, a Twitter user who couldn't get away even once with what Trump gets away with daily. They want him banned. They don't want the rules changed such that everyone can talk like Trump does. They want the rules enforced on Trump and he be removed from Twitter entirely. The article linked in this tweet covers an event that happened 3 or 4 days ago, where Trump was tweeting legitimately false information, I'm pretty sure, about the death of Lori K. Closetus. And here's one of those tweets. Comcast should open up a long overdue Florida cold case against psycho Joe Scarborugh. I know him and Crazy Mika well. Used them beautifully in the last election, dumped them nicely, and will state on the record that he is nuts. Besides, bad ratings. This is a very strange tweet, guys. These tweets are in reference to the death of Lori Closetus, which was, at the time, nearly 20 years ago, suspected to be a murder, but later it came out that it was probably just an accident. However, Trump's here talking about it like it's a cold case. Here is a letter sent from her husband to Jack Dorsey. Nearly 19 years ago, my wife, who had an undiagnosed heart condition, fell and hit her head on her desk at work. She was found dead the next morning. Her name is Lori Closetus, and she was 28 years old when she died. Her passing is the single most painful thing that I have ever had to deal with in my 52 years, and continues to haunt her parents and sister. There has been a constant barrage of falsehoods, half-truths, innuendo, and conspiracy theories since the day she died. I realize this may sound like an exaggeration. Unfortunately, it is the verifiable truth. Because of this, I have struggled to move forward with my life. The frequency, intensity, ugliness, and promulgation of these horrifying lies ever increases on the internet. These conspiracy theorists, including most recently the President of the United States, continue to spread their bile and misinformation on your platform, disparaging the memory of my wife and our marriage. President Trump on Tuesday tweeted to his nearly 80 million followers, alluding to the repeatedly debunked falsehood that my wife was murdered by her boss, former U.S. Representative Joe Scarborugh. And here's the 3 Trump tweets about it. My request is simple. Please delete these tweets. I'm a research engineer and not a lawyer, but I've reviewed all of Twitter's rules in terms of service. The president's tweet that suggests Lori was murdered, without any evidence, and contrary to the official autopsy, is a violation of Twitter's community rules in terms of service. An ordinary user like me would be banished from the platform for such a tweet, but I'm only asking that the tweets be removed. It seems like Trump has tweeted something that is not only false, but verifiably false, potentially even slanderous. And the author of this letter is right when he says that if it were anybody else, they would be banned. So what is the good solution here? Because as far as I can see, every solution seems to be bad. We can continue with an unfair system, where Trump and some select others can say whatever they like, while plebs get routinely banned for far less. Maybe blue Twitter checkmarks with the right politics can go on saying anything that they like, without any repercussions at all. Maybe big-name political figures, like Trump, can say things but have them put behind some kind of a wall, if Twitter's Ministry of Truth judges them to be fake news. And then maybe the rest of us just gets banned. That's how it is right now. And it's blatantly unfair. But what are the alternatives? Should Twitter start cracking down more and banning everyone regardless of their social status? Should Trump actually have his tweets deleted or be kicked off the platform? Because that begins to go against Supreme Court rulings. The last alternative is to let everyone say everything, free-for-all, old internet style. But this letter does prove that there actually is a little bit of a problem when it comes to, say, conspiracy theorists. Most of the time, conspiracy theories are just good fun. You know, you turn on YouTube, well, not YouTube anymore because they've all been banned off of it. You turn on some kind of site somewhere where people are talking about how the world's actually flat and they're wearing tinfoil hats and it's like goofy, crazy nonsense. And really, only a minority of people are actually convinced by that stuff. Most of the time, regular people watch that stuff just to get a good laugh out of it. That's why the ancient aliens guy was a meme for so long. Because it's fun to watch an idiot with a dumb theory spiral into madness before your very eyes trying to explain all this nonsense. People are entertained by the absurd. But you also have conspiracy theories like the one that Trump peddled about this dead woman. And that will always be the fundamental problem with free speech, is that sometimes you have to countenance speech that is not only offensive to you, but is ridiculous, is very clearly false. But again, that's what being an adult is. Figuring it out for yourself. And even though that's not an ideal solution, it seems to be the best one we have. What makes this all very interesting is that this is happening at the exact same time as another report's coming out that almost nobody's talking about. Leonard French did a stream on it because he's a lawyer. He's like a lawyer YouTuber, and if you want to go watch his stream, I highly recommend you do. But this is Section 512 of Title 17. This is specifically part of copyright law. And this is basically a study commissioned by the US Copyright Office to investigate how exactly YouTube abuses the DMCA. And as you can see here, there's a part regarding Section 512 safe harbors. This is obviously not the same safe harbors as Section 230. This basically refers to why YouTube isn't held liable for copyright infringement when its users upload copyrighted content to the platform. It is a similar set of law, but it is different. And it seems like social media is going to be coming under fire from that angle as well. Because just like with Section 230, they have also been abusing their safe harbor status over here. This is a very interesting read, but it is very long and very technical. And like I said, I would recommend you go and watch Leonard French's stream on this subject as he goes into this whole thing in depth. But the important part for me is that this is coming at the exact same time as Trump is beginning to bring the hammer down regarding Section 230. Basically, big tech has been abusing all of the various safe harbors it's been given. It was given them so that they could grow freely and maintain their business models. But now that they've created the monopolies that they have, they are exploiting their status to directly punish people who use their platforms. All the while continuing to say that it's vital to a free and open internet that they continue to do this and get off scot-free with it. And while it might sound great that the government's finally coming down on big tech and we're finally going to see some kind of freedom from their tyranny, this is not necessarily the good ending, guys. Because while it's nightmarish and dystopian to have corporations deciding what is and isn't free speech, do you really want the government stepping in and taking control? Do you want a nationalized Twitter? Because that's what Weibo is over in China. On their isolated internet, they have their own social media platforms, directly controlled by the government, and they regulate what people can and can't say. While corporate tyranny is alive and real, so is government tyranny. And if we have to use the government to step in and bring us free speech again, we also have to make sure they don't overstep their bounds. Because we can very easily stumble into a place where we have, say, a nationalized Twitter, or a nationalized internet, a department of propaganda, where the only truth you can publish online is the truth that the current government allows you to publish. That would be just as bad as what we currently have. The ideal solution to all of this is that big tech stops shitting the bed, stops ruining it for everyone else, and actually pulls their heads out of their asses. But they seem to want to be the moral arbiters of what is right and wrong for every single person that currently exists. I don't want an internet where a handful of CEOs decides what the truth is, decides what you're allowed to post, decides what you're allowed to think and feel, decides what's offensive or not. But I also don't want an internet where the American government decides that as well. That is for people to decide. If that means that sometimes misinformation gets through, sometimes you see conspiracy theories on your feed, sometimes somebody calls you a nasty name and you have to block them, fine, so be it. We're adults. We can make decisions for ourselves. I'm tired of having my hand held every single time I open up my browser.